The moment I hit send, everything changed. In that instant, every member of the board received the forwarded emails Sophia had worked so hard to bury. The evidence was undeniable. Confidential company documents she had quietly redirected, secret, conversations with executives promising them lucrative deals in exchange for their votes, and personal exchanges with Stephen that went far beyond professionalism. Sophia froze mid-sentence, her poised smile collapsing as her tablet lit up with notifications. The boardroom, moments ago filled with polite tension, shifted into hushed murmurs and exchanged glances. No one dared look at her directly, but their fingers moved swiftly, scrolling through the messages now filling their screens. Stephen, seated 2 chairs to Sophia's left, visibly paled. His confident smirk evaporated as his name appeared repeatedly. Throughout the threads, each email more damning than the last. The chairman, normally composed, now narrowed his eyes at Sophia. "Care to explain, Miss Sophia?" Sophia's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but her voice cracked under the weight of exposed deceit. This isn't what it looks like. These are private conversations, out of context." Mark stood. From his chair, his voice calm, measured. "Would you like me to provide the full server logs as well? Time-stamped, authenticated, directly pulled from the company's backup servers that you tried to erase?" Her eyes widened in panic. The boardroom fell completely silent. Stephen shifted uncomfortably, whispering under his breath. "Mark, you don't have to do this." Mark didn't even glance at him. "I'm not doing anything. I'm simply letting the truth speak." The chairman sighed, tapping his pen against the polished table. "Effective immediately, this promotion hearing is suspended. Sophia, Stephen, both of you are under formal investigation pending further review." Sophia's breathing grew shallow as her perfectly constructed image crumbled around her. She gripped the edge of the table, as if hoping the polished wood could steady her collapsing world. Mark watched without a flicker of emotion. After years of sacrifice, humiliation, and silent betrayal, this moment wasn't revenge. It was justice finally catching up, and for the first time in a long time, Mark felt nothing but clarity. Mark never planned for his marriage to become a secret. When they first started dating, Sophia was a driven junior analyst eager to climb the ranks at Horizon Enterprises. Mark admired her ambition. She carried herself with confidence, sharp intelligence, and an undeniable charm that made people listen when she spoke. He was already established at another tech firm back then, building a strong reputation for himself in systems architecture. Their paths crossed at an industry conference, where a chance conversation over coffee turned into hours of discussing algorithms, predictive models, and market disruptions. What started as professional curiosity turned quickly into long nights, shared dreams, and eventually, love. When Sophia was offered a position at Horizon, she was ecstatic but hesitant. The company was fiercely competitive. Relationships within the organization were frowned upon, especially for anyone aspiring to leadership. She suggested keeping their relationship private to avoid office gossip that could jeopardize her advancement. Mark didn't hesitate. For her, he willingly left his position, quietly accepted a consulting role within Horizon's research division, and stayed in the background while Sophia took center stage. It was supposed to be temporary. Once she secured her place, they would go public and build their future together. At least that's what she promised. At first, it was easy to believe her. Sophia worked tirelessly, and Mark supported her at every turn. When her team struggled with complex forecasting models, Mark spent nights coding solutions. When high-profile presentations loomed, Mark fine-tuned her slides and prepared the datasets that left executives impressed. His name never appeared on any of the credits, but Sophia always reassured him it was for the greater good. "Once I'm promoted, we'll tell everyone. Just trust me a little longer," she'd say, pressing his hand gently. Mark trusted her. Years passed. Promotions came. Sophia's reputation flourished. Internally, she became known as a rising star, someone who seemed to single-handedly drive major projects to success. Few knew that behind those achievements was Mark's silent work, building the technical backbone she depended on. As she rose through the company ranks, her distance from Mark widened. She stopped coming home for dinner. Business trips with executives and late-night strategy meetings with Stephen, her new operations manager, became frequent. Stephen was charismatic, always by her side, offering advice, celebrating wins, whispering solutions in meetings. Mark noticed the shift. The small gestures between husband and wife disappeared. The quiet texts during the workday, the weekend getaways, they all faded into professional obligations that conveniently never included him. He tried not to question her intentions. He told himself that the sacrifices were worth it, that Sophia was under pressure and needed his support more than ever. Whenever doubts crept into his mind, she would offer just enough tenderness to keep him holding on. A soft kiss before bed, a whispered promise of future vacations, subtle reassurances that everything's fine, we're just busy right now. But the signs became harder to ignore. One evening, Mark stumbled upon the first crack. While working late, an automated IT notification flagged an unusual request. Sophia had requested deletion of several archived emails from internal servers. Curiosity led him to quietly investigate. What he discovered shattered his trust. Dozens of his own reports, technical documents, and internal correspondences had been systematically erased or reassigned, his work repackaged under Sophia's name. His stomach twisted. It wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Still, he didn't confront her immediately. He needed to be sure. Over several months, he began quietly backing up server logs, compiling evidence as more patterns emerged. Files he authored were disappearing right after being submitted. Presentations he built were presented as entirely hers. Sophia's public image blossomed with every new success that bore his fingerprints behind the scenes. Stephen's involvement grew bolder as well. Mark overheard office whispers about how often Sophia and Stephen were seen together outside of work. Lavish dinners, out-of-town conferences, private meetings that stretched late into the night. The rumors stung, but what hurt more was Sophia's increasing indifference. Even at home, she began treating him like an inconvenience. Financial control shifted entirely to her under the guise of simplifying their lives. Joint accounts became restricted. Any major purchase suggestion by Mark was dismissed as unnecessary. "Focus on your work, Mark. Let me handle the rest," she would say with an exasperated sigh. He swallowed the humiliation. Over and over. Then came the breaking point. Their anniversary. Mark had meticulously planned the evening for months. Reservations, at the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurant, a private chef, a customized projection of their early memories together. Everything was prepared, waiting for her arrival. Minutes before the reservation, Sophia texted. Something urgent came up with Stephen. Client dinner. Rain check? Mark sat alone for hours, watching the reservation time lapse while the untouched bottle of vintage wine sat chilling beside him. That night, something inside him shifted permanently. The realization was unavoidable. She no longer saw him as her partner, only as a tool she no longer needed. The facade had crumbled. Whatever affection remained was now buried beneath betrayal and cold ambition. Mark no longer needed more promises. He needed truth, and he was ready to expose it. Mark knew the board meeting would change everything, but he never expected how quickly the betrayal would escalate after it. In the days leading up to Sophia's promotion vote, the tension inside the Chi house had become unbearable. Every conversation between them was reduced to short, clipped exchanges. She barely looked at him when they spoke, as if avoiding eye contact would erase the weight of what was happening beneath the surface. Mark had been quiet, observing every move, waiting for her to offer even a fragment of honesty. But each day, Sophia grew colder, her words more calculated. "Mark, I need you to understand something," she said one evening, standing at the edge of the living room, arms crossed tightly. "This promotion is important not just for me, but for both of us. Once I secure it, everything will stabilize. The board needs to see unity right now, not conflict." He watched her carefully. "You keep saying it's for us, Sophia, but I don't see where I fit into your future anymore. Her eyes flickered, but she quickly disguised the momentary crack in her composure. "You're overthinking it. You're still part of my life. But I have to handle things carefully. These board members are old-fashioned, Mark. They wouldn't take me seriously if they thought I got here with help from my husband." Mark didn't respond. There was no point. He had heard the same rationalizations too many times, and yet what she said next carried a sharper edge than usual. "You have to trust me. The last thing I need is you making waves right now." Making waves. That was all he represented to her now. An obstacle, a risk to be contained. Days later, as the promotion vote drew closer, the whispers around the office grew louder. Stephen's name kept surfacing, how instrumental he had been in Sophia's rise, how close they had become, how often they were seen leaving together late at night after meetings. Mark had seen enough. One evening, unable to suppress his suspicion any longer, he quietly accessed the secure internal servers where Horizon's IT backups were archived. His hands shook as he pulled the data. Logs, deleted emails, server access histories. The pattern was undeniable. Sophia hadn't just deleted his work. She had fabricated correspondence that exaggerated her role and minimized his entirely. She had actively sabotaged him to solidify her own standing. But buried within the files was something far worse. Mark uncovered a private thread between Sophia and Stephen, discussing confidential company information being exchanged for external investment opportunities. She was selling pieces of the company's proprietary data in exchange for promises of future board support. The betrayal wasn't limited to their marriage. She was risking the company's future and Mark's career with every secret deal she struck. He sat back in his chair, the weight of her deception crashing down like a tidal wave. The woman he once trusted, once sacrificed everything for, had quietly dismantled everything they built together. The next day, Mark arrived at work earlier than usual. As he walked into the building, he spotted Stephen waiting near the executive elevators. The man's expression carried that same smug confidence that had slowly chipped away at Mark for months. Stephen stepped forward, his voice low and condescending. "Rough week, huh? You must feel a little out of place these days." Mark didn't stop walking, but Stephen continued to follow. "Look, you're a smart guy, but you're not cut out for these kinds of games. Sophia's moving forward. You should consider stepping aside before you embarrass yourself any further. You wouldn't want to damage her career over petty jealousy." Mark finally turned his head, his voice steady. "Petty jealousy? You think that's what this is about?" Stephen smirked. "Call it whatever you want. We both know where this is headed. Sophia's about to become vice president. She has people behind her. Important people. You're just a complication." For a brief moment, Mark saw the entire picture with perfect clarity. Stephen wasn't just the opportunist riding on Sophia's ambition, he was part of it. They had built this betrayal together. Later that evening, back home, Sophia approached him as though nothing had happened. She wore her usual calm facade, pretending the growing tension between them didn't exist. "Are you coming to the promotion?" "Announcement tomorrow?" she asked casually while flipping through a report. Mark studied her face. "You really want me there?" She glanced up, her voice coated in false warmth. "Of course, you've always supported me." He forced a smile. "Then I'll be there." But this time, he wouldn't sit quietly in the background. The truth she tried so hard to bury would be laid bare. She had manipulated the narrative for too long, stolen his work, erased his contributions, and built a future by stepping over everything they once shared. Mark had sacrificed his career, his reputation, and years of his life for her success. And she rewarded that loyalty by aligning herself with Stephen, trading integrity for power. Tomorrow, that facade would collapse, and this time, Sophia wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it. The night before the board meeting, Mark sat alone, in the study, staring at the neat rows of files and evidence he had compiled. The faint glow of the desk lamp illuminated the documents, each one a piece of Sophia's betrayal. The truth was heavy, but it was no longer surprising. What weighed on him wasn't shock. It was the emptiness. For years, Mark had been her silent, partner, quietly sacrificing his ambitions for hers. He used to think their partnership was something beautiful, two people supporting each other, building a future together. Now, looking back, it felt foolish. Every moment he once cherished had been repurposed, twisted into another stepping stone for Sophia to climb higher. He remembered how she once clutched his hand after receiving her first promotion, the tears of joy in her eyes, the whispered gratitude, the promises that they were in it together. He believed her then. He had always believed her. Now those memories felt like cruel jokes. Mark leaned back, closing his eyes, trying to breathe through the swirling thoughts. There had been warnings, signs that he had deliberately ignored, her late-night meetings that extended far beyond reasonable hours, her carefully chosen words whenever he questioned her decisions, the vague explanations, the cold distance that replaced intimacy. And yet, despite everything, a part of him had continued to hold on to hope that she would return to him not just as his wife, but as his partner. That hope had slowly eroded with every lie, every manipulated project report, and every deleted email. Mark's thoughts wandered to Stephen's smug voice echoing in his head, the arrogance, the condescension, the certainty that Mark would simply fade away, too weak to fight back. That had been the expectation all along, that Mark would remain, the quiet man behind the curtain, grateful for the crumbs of acknowledgement Sophia occasionally tossed his way, but not this time. Beneath the sadness was something colder now, a stillness that came when a person finally accepts the truth they've been running from. As the hours passed, sleep never came. Mark scrolled through old photos on his phone, watching the carefully curated gallery of smiles and vacations they once shared. The images felt distant, like photographs of strangers. He didn't recognize the version of himself that had once beamed proudly beside her. That man had lived on illusions. He paused on one photo, an anniversary dinner 3 years earlier. Sophia leaned into him, smiling at the camera, while Mark had his arm around her. But even in that image, with fresh eyes, he saw it now, the vacant look behind her polished smile. She had been slipping away long before he ever realized it. The next morning arrived, heavy and gray. The clouds outside mirrored the weight in Mark's chest. As he dressed for the meeting, he moved with robotic precision. Every detail had been prepared. The files were secure, the emails backed up in multiple locations, the server logs authenticated. There would be no room for denial today. Walking into the building, Mark felt the eyes on him, the whispers, the quiet conversations that stopped the moment he entered the room. Many at Horizon had long speculated about his fading role, curious about his presence but too polite to ask. They saw him as a talented technician who'd never reached the top, someone overshadowed by Sophia's brilliance. In truth, they had only ever seen what Sophia allowed them to see. As he approached the executive floor, Stephen crossed his path once again. This time there was no smug grin, only thinly veiled irritation. "You really are determined to ruin everything, aren't you?" Stephen whispered under his breath. Mark met his gaze calmly. "You and I both know who ruined it." Stephen's jaw tightened, but he said nothing else, stepping aside as Mark walked past him. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was electric. Directors murmured softly as Sophia stood near the head of the table, her expression as flawless as always. She greeted the board members with poised confidence, addressing each by name, thanking them for considering her for the vice president role. When she spotted Mark entering, her smile twitched for the briefest second. There was unease in her eyes, uncertainty. She had no idea how much he knew. The chairman called the meeting to order. Sophia began her presentation, highlighting her contributions, her leadership, and her vision for Horizon's future. Her voice carried the familiar blend of authority and charm that had won over so many in the room. Mark watched her carefully. Even now, she performed flawlessly, as though nothing was amiss. She spoke of loyalty, innovation, teamwork, words that sounded hollow to him now. Words she had long abandoned in practice. As she continued, Mark's mind drifted to all the nights he sat in silence while she prepared these very presentations with data he had compiled for her. The quiet compromises he made. The countless times he convinced himself that she still valued him. The truth was brutal in its simplicity. She didn't. The chairman's voice snapped him back. Before we proceed to voting, does anyone have any concerns or final statements? Mark's pulse slowed. The moment had arrived. He stood, his chair sliding back with a deliberate scrape. All eyes turned toward him. Sophia's confident expression faltered. She forced a tight smile, attempting to maintain composure. Mark reached into his briefcase and placed a small flash drive on the table, his voice steady and even. I do. For the first time, it was her turn to feel exposed. The silence in the boardroom stretched for what felt like hours. The air was heavy as every director opened the files Mark had just delivered. Screens lit up, pages loaded, and eyes darted back and forth across damning emails. Sophia stood motionless, her breathing shallow. She tried to maintain a professional posture, but her fingers trembled slightly against the folder she held. Mark remained silent. He didn't need to say anything. The evidence spoke louder than any accusation. One of the senior board members, Mr. Langford, finally broke the silence. His voice was sharp. Sophia, you assured us your work was fully compliant. Care to explain these conversations? Sophia swallowed hard. These are private discussions. Out of context. Misunderstood. They don't reflect, Mark's voice interrupted her, steady and measured. The full server logs, authentication keys, and timestamps have been included. These weren't taken out of context. If anything, they were carefully hidden from compliance audits. The chairman's face was pale. You were deleting and reassigning critical documents. These emails show you selling confidential company forecasts to external investors while under non-disclosure agreements. This isn't misunderstanding, Ms. Sophia. Stephen shifted in his seat. His jaw clenched, but his silence was loud enough. His name appeared throughout the conversations, deeply implicated. The chairman continued, his voice cold. Effective immediately, this hearing is suspended. You are both removed from decision-making roles pending full investigation. Sophia's controlled mask cracked. Her eyes shifted rapidly between the board members, searching for support. Finding none, she turned to Mark, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. Mark, please. You don't have to do this. We can talk about this privately. Don't destroy everything. For a brief moment, Mark stared into her eyes, the same eyes he once trusted. But now there was nothing behind them but fear. You destroyed it yourself, Sophia. Before she could respond, security staff entered the room under the board's silent signal. The chairman nodded toward them. Escort them both from the building while this matter is reviewed. Stephen bolted from his chair. Wait! You can't... But the security team moved quickly, guiding both Sophia and Stephen out of the room. The doors closed behind them with a heavy finality. As the board members sat in stunned silence, the chairman turned back to Mark. His expression softened. Mr. Mark, I owe you an apology. It seems we were unaware of how deeply this misconduct ran. Your discretion in handling this is commendable. Mark nodded politely but said nothing. The damage was done. No apology could restore what had been lost, but just when Mark thought the worst had passed, the second wave arrived. Later that afternoon, as Mark was preparing to leave the office for the last time, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. The voice on the line was sharp, formal. Mr. Mark, this is Attorney Green representing Horizon Enterprises Legal Counsel. We've been notified that you've unlawfully accessed confidential company data. Legal action is being prepared. Mark froze for a moment, his grip tightening around the phone. I'm sorry? The voice continued, calm but ruthless. Your unauthorized access to internal servers violates company policy. You'll be held accountable for breaching cybersecurity protocols, including misappropriation of trade secrets. His chest tightened, not from fear but from bitter recognition. This was Sophia's next move. She wasn't done yet. Mark exhaled slowly. I collected that information after Sophia deleted my contributions and reassigned my work under false pretenses. I have full audit trails verifying every file belonged to my original submissions. There was a pause on the other end. Regardless, the board is obligated to investigate. Until this is resolved, we recommend you retain legal counsel. The call ended, leaving Mark standing in the quiet office as the weight of her newest betrayal settled on him. Even cornered, Sophia had shifted instantly into self-preservation mode, launching accusations to paint herself as the victim and him as the criminal. She was prepared to take him down entirely if it meant protecting her position, but Mark was no longer the man who stood quietly in the shadows. This time, he had anticipated her desperation. He reached into his briefcase and reviewed the backup copies he had secured off-site. Every email, every deleted document, every server log had already been authenticated by a third-party cybersecurity firm, signed, time-stamped, and notarized. His legal team was standing by. The second battle had begun, but Mark was ready. This time, she wouldn't win. The lawsuit came faster than Mark expected. Within 48 hours, Horizon Enterprises officially filed legal action against him, accusing him of unauthorized access, theft of proprietary data, and breach of company cybersecurity policies. Every major news outlet in the industry ran the headlines. Horizon VP nominee exposes husband in corporate espionage scandal. Sophia Lee and husband entangled in internal cyber theft investigation. The narrative had been flipped overnight. In the public eye, Sophia was now a betrayed executive who had no knowledge of her husband's alleged crimes. Mark was painted as the bitter husband who couldn't handle his wife's success. Mark stayed quiet. His legal team, however, was ready. The independent cybersecurity audit he had commissioned weeks before the board meeting was already submitted to the authorities. The audit proved without question that every file he accessed had originally been authored by him. The forensic evidence revealed Sophia's deliberate deletion of his emails, the reassignment of his work, and the secret correspondence between her and Stephen outlining their plans to manipulate internal promotions through backdoor agreements. The state investigation escalated quickly. Multiple board members were subpoenaed. Horizon's internal compliance officers were called to testify. And under mounting legal pressure, Horizon Enterprises was forced to cooperate fully. But the real turning point came 3 weeks later. Mark stood in the grand marble lobby of the state courthouse, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit. His expression was composed, every movement deliberate. This was no longer personal. It was survival. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Dozens of reporters filled the gallery. The judge presided calmly as both legal teams made their opening statements. Horizon's attorneys argued that Mark had bypassed security protocols and unlawfully acquired classified data. Mark's defense, however, laid out the trail of deceit in painstaking detail, how Sophia and Stephen had systematically erased his work, reassigned projects, and even restructured financial accounts to limit his involvement. Sophia sat across from him at the plaintiff's table, her face carefully neutral, but Mark saw the tremble in her fingers, the occasional quick glances she cast toward Stephen, who sat beside her, visibly nervous. The prosecution called Sophia to the witness stand. The attorney began, "Ms. Lee, were you aware that your husband was accessing company servers without clearance?" Sophia spoke with measured calm. "No, he never had authorization for those files. He violated security protocols." "And were you aware that Mr. Mark transferred company documents to an external hard drive?" "Yes," she said softly. "That's why we reported the breach, to protect the company." The prosecutor nodded, pretending sympathy. "How did this make you feel?" Sophia's voice quivered at the edges. "I was shocked, heartbroken. I trusted him. I never imagined he would betray me and the company." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Sophia lowered her gaze, projecting vulnerability. Then it was Mark's attorney's turn. "Ms. Lee, are you aware of this audit report?" the lawyer asked, raising a thick document. "This independent forensic audit shows that every file in question was originally authored by Mr. Mark. Not only that, but the metadata reveals you manually deleted his emails and reassigned projects under your own name. Sophia's face stiffened. I don't recall those details. You don't recall deleting emails? You don't recall submitting his work as your own to the board? I was under tremendous pressure, she said quickly. I delegated tasks. There must have been confusion. Mark's lawyer didn't blink. Confusion or deliberate theft? Should we review the server logs? The judge allowed it. The room dimmed as the monitors displayed a full breakdown of server access records, timestamps, login IDs, and file deletions, all traced directly to Sophia's corporate account. Each deletion corresponded with critical project milestones where she later took full credit. The lawyer continued, and these external communications, private emails between you and Stephen discussing the suppression of your husband's contributions, negotiating favors with board, members for promotion support, do you deny sending these? Sophia's voice faltered. I can't verify those messages. We can, the lawyer shot back, placing notarized server printouts into evidence. The digital signatures verify their authenticity. The courtroom grew tense. Several reporters scribbled frantically into their notepads. The jury watched her every reaction closely now. Stephen shifted uncomfortably. His face glistened under the courtroom lights. Mark's attorney pivoted, locking eyes with Stephen. Mr. Stephen, perhaps you can explain why you accepted over $200,000 in off-the-record bonuses from private investors immediately following these confidential email exchanges? Stephen's jaw clenched. I was compensated for consulting services. Consulting? The lawyer raised a skeptical eyebrow. Or bribery? Let me remind you that corporate financial audits have already frozen your personal assets pending this investigation. Stephen's face paled. The prosecution objected, but the damage was done. The judge allowed the evidence to stand. The climax came when the IT security officer from Horizon took the stand. A neutral party with no stake in either side, his testimony carried weight. We conducted a full system review, the officer stated. Mr. Mark's credentials were valid. He did not bypass security. In fact, his credentials granted him initial access to all assigned projects, many of which were removed or reassigned after completion. And who authorized the reassignment of those files? Mark's attorney asked. The administrative trail points directly to Ms. Sophia Lee's account. The courtroom erupted into whispers again. The judge pounded the gavel for silence. The opposing attorney's strategy crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. One by one, every piece of Sophia and Stephen's story unraveled. The judge recessed for deliberation. Hours later, everyone returned as the verdict was read. The court finds no evidence of criminal wrongdoing by Mr. Mark. All claims of corporate theft and espionage are dismissed. Furthermore, evidence of corporate fraud, obstruction of justice, and misappropriation of intellectual property is substantiated against Ms. Sophia Lee and Mr. Stephen Garrett. Both will face formal charges filed by state prosecutors. Sophia's composure shattered. She gasped for air, her hands trembling violently as Stephen hung his head in resignation. Reporters swarmed as cameras flashed. Mark stood silently, his expression stoic. There was no joy in this victory, only closure. As court officers approached to escort Sophia and Stephen from the courtroom, Sophia turned to Mark one final time. Her voice cracked with desperation. Mark, please, we can fix this. I still love you. Mark's eyes remained cold. You love power, not me. Her face crumpled as she was led away. Outside the courthouse, reporters pressed toward him, microphones shoved forward. Mr. Mark, any comment on today's verdict? He paused, choosing his words carefully. The truth always comes out, no matter how long it's buried. He walked past the crowd, leaving the cameras and headlines behind. For the first time in years, Mark felt free. Not victorious, but free. The chapter with Sophia was over. The months that followed the trial were quiet. The headlines faded as newer scandals took over the media cycle, but the consequences of Sophia's actions continued unfolding behind the scenes. Sophia and Stephen's assets were frozen by court order. Multiple lawsuits were filed by Horizon Enterprises. Shareholders, after the public exposure of fraud, tanked the company's stock. The board quickly distanced itself from the scandal, terminating both Sophia and Stephen, stripping their titles, and publicly condemning their actions to salvage the corporation's image. For Mark, it was not about watching their downfall. It was about finally stepping away from the weight he had carried for years. With his name fully cleared, Mark turned his attention to rebuilding his own life. He quietly accepted an offer from Titan Analytics, one of Horizon's fiercest competitors. They had long respected Mark's technical brilliance and, unlike Sophia, valued his work without ulterior motives. Titan offered him full creative control over a new department, a private research team, and complete ownership of his patents. What they offered, however, was not just a position, it was respect, something he hadn't felt in years. On his first day at Titan's new headquarters, Mark walked through the glass-walled office that overlooked the city skyline. The sun was rising, casting gold across the skyscrapers. His name was etched on the polished plaque outside his office, Mark Reynolds, Chief Research Officer. No more shadows. No more secrets. The work consumed him, but in a different way now. Each project, each breakthrough was entirely his. Every innovation carried his name, and every challenge reawakened the passion that had been buried beneath years of sacrifice. But as much as his professional life flourished, Mark remained cautious about his personal world. The wounds left by Sophia weren't easily erased. Then came Avery. They first met during a cross-department collaboration between Titan's data security team and the AI development division. Avery was brilliant, sharp, and refreshingly transparent. Their conversations were pure, focused on the work itself, the kind of intellectual partnership Mark once believed he had with Sophia, but never truly did. Their professional discussions turned into occasional coffee breaks, then quiet dinners after long nights in the lab. But unlike before, there was no manipulation, no pretense. Avery never tried to control him. She never asked for more than what he willingly offered. One evening, as they sat across from each other in a quiet cafe after another successful presentation, Avery spoke softly. "You don't talk about your past much," she said, her tone gentle but curious. Mark stared at his coffee for a moment before answering. "Because for a long time, I let someone define who I was. I won't make that mistake again." Avery nodded, understanding without pushing further. "I don't care who you were, Mark. I only care about who you are now." Her words didn't carry pity. They carried honesty. And for the first time, Mark allowed himself to believe them. Weeks turned into months, and their relationship blossomed naturally. There was no grand declaration or forced conversation about commitment. It simply grew, steady and strong, built on trust and mutual respect. One night, as they left Titan's office late after finalizing a new patent, Avery stopped him by the elevator. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" Mark replied. "Everything you went through." Mark thought for a moment. "It taught me the value of what's real. I wouldn't be standing here otherwise." Avery smiled. "That's why I admire you. Not because you overcame it, but because you didn't let it turn you bitter." He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "With you, it's easy not to be." While Mark was building his new life, the consequences for Sophia were far from over. Stephen, desperate to avoid prison time, cooperated fully with the prosecutors, turning over evidence that implicated Sophia even further. With his testimony, the prosecution solidified additional charges of embezzlement and obstruction. During the final sentencing, Sophia stood before the judge, pale and broken. The courtroom was nearly empty this time. No cameras, no reporters. Only lawyers, court officers, and a handful of family members sat quietly as the sentence was delivered. The judge's voice was firm. "Sophia Lee, you are hereby sentenced to 8 years in state prison for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." Sophia's legs nearly buckled. She gripped the table to steady herself, her breathing ragged. As court officers approached to escort her away, she locked eyes with Mark, who sat silently at the back of the room. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mark, please. I never stopped loving you." Mark's face remained unreadable, his voice calm as he delivered the only words she would hear from him again. "You never loved me. You loved what I could give you. And now you have nothing left to take." Her tears fell, but Mark didn't look away. He watched as she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, a final image of the woman who once controlled every corner of his life, now powerless. When the doors closed behind her, Mark exhaled deeply, not with triumph, but with release. Months later, Titan Analytics finalized its rise to industry dominance, securing contracts Horizon once held. Mark's department was credited for much of the company's growth. His name became a fixture in Meow industry journals, not because of controversy, but because of innovation. One evening, at an international conference, Mark stood at the podium delivering a keynote address on data integrity and ethical leadership in corporate technology. His voice was strong, his message clear. True leadership isn't measured by titles or power. It's measured by how you treat the people who build your success. As the audience erupted into applause, Mark spotted Avery standing in the front row, pride glowing in her eyes. After the conference, as they walked through the quiet hotel lobby, Avery slipped her hand into his. "You've come so far," Mark smiled, "because this time, I chose the right person to stand beside." Avery leaned closer. "The past is behind us," Mark nodded, "and the future's wide open." They stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the ghosts of his past fully behind for the last time.